get started here, and I don't have a whole lot to say, but I'm really pleased to see the turnout, so thanks everybody for coming, and I'm going to pass it along to Cass here without further ado. I'm Steve Hatzenbeeler, by the way, the chair of the tree board. There are a lot of other tree board members in the room, so if you have questions for us, feel free to track us down at the end of the evening or anytime during. And
you should make them stand up so they can recognize you.
All right, tree board members, on your feet. We have Barbara and Vivian, and Barbara and Jed and Doug. And I'm Steve. We have a couple of other tree board members who couldn't make it tonight, but yeah, if you have any questions for us, just let us know. I wanted to ask before we start, we have this screen over here. I can leave it on if anybody thinks they would rather look at that one than this one, but any opinion on that? All right, I'm going to just turn it off to conserve the... Oh, you think? That's better for you? Okay, sure, no problem.
Oh, look at that.
We'll leave it on.
We could only move it out so it swung out like the one at home.
All right, and so I'd like you to please welcome Cass Turnbull.
It's my pleasure to be here in the beautiful town of Edmonds. I'm up from Seattle, and I'm envious of the livability factor that you have maintained. Let's see what I have here. And I put this slideshow specifically together for you, and it's about the things that people believe about trees. I'm surprised to see this many people because I can give a class on, say, pruning or perennials, and the room is packed. But when you get to trees, everybody figures, you know, what's to know? You know, you dig a hole, you plant a tree, it grows. But there's a lot of misinformation still out there and things to know. I have run a nonprofit to promote better pruning of trees and shrubs for almost 30 years. And before that, I was a gardener at the park department. And I also run a landscaping business, my own landscaping business. And what else? Oh, I'm a certified arborist, and I'm famous for ranting about bad pruning, basically tree topping. That's me in one of my customers' gardens. When I started plant honesty 30 years ago or so, tree topping was as common as dirt. I mean, if you were a big tree in Seattle, you were topped or you were about to be topped. Every spring, as the sap rose and the days got longer, people would go out and have the tree services top their trees because that's what you did. It was synonymous with pruning, and after windstorms, the news people would come on and have a story about why you should top your trees to keep them safe, and the media horticulturists would tell you how to top your trees to make your raking chores easier, and so there was a lot of that going. And there were only like 3 companies in Seattle that did not top trees and did not promote topping trees. We measured how many tree services advertised tree topping as if it was a service by analyzing the pages in the phone book. And about 5 years in, we found out that about 65% of the ads listed tree topping as a service. Of course, there was a much greater amount than that going on. But that slowly reduced to 40%, and then to 20%, and then to 10%, and then to 2%. That was a good year. You know, every time the phone book would arrive, I'd open it up, rip out the pages on your tree service. I know it's right next to trophies, and analyze them. And then one year I opened it up, and there were none. So, you know, that was through a concerted effort to let people know that tree topping wasn't a form of pruning, it's sort of a form of vandalism. And of course now, I go to open up my yellow pages and there aren't any. It's all on the web, so analyze something else. Pruning. So the first myth that I think people largely believe is that you can control the size of a tree with pruning it. If you just knew the right cut, the right time of year, and were diligent, you could stop your tree at whatever size you need it to be. And by and large, except for maybe fruit trees and hedges, it's not true. And the reason is, the harder you prune, the faster they grow. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. The reason is because of the kind of cut you use. There's 3 basic kinds of cuts, and this works for all your plants, or almost all your plants. That's the heading cut, the reduction cut, and the removal cut. And so the heading cut is just when you whack off the top of your tree or a branch, and it will either cause this to die back, or it will stimulate dormant shoots to grow out with many straight, skinny water sprouts is what they're called. And they're growing about 5 times as fast as the tree was, or the shrub was before you cut it. They're sort of racing up to get all the leaves back that they needed. And the problem with that is your next reaction is just to whack them again, because it obviously didn't get the message that it wasn't supposed to go. But that's just more heading cuts, and every place you cut one of these, it sprouts, 7, 8, 10 new shoots, and they zoom up. So you're up there all the time cutting them to try and keep your tree short, and what happens is the energy that would have gone to the top goes broad. They will go somewhere. The size of your tree is under genetic control. It has to do with its genus, its species, and its age. The other kind of a cut, the right way to shorten a branch is to cut to a side branch which is already shorter. This works with fruit trees, not so much with regular trees. And then the more frequent cut is the removal cut, where you take a side branch off to where it began as a bud. So you're actually making your tree taller by taking off the lower limbs or thinning it out. This is what happens when you top a tree, is you get some version of this. This was done for a view. We have a slideshow called Saving Trees and Views, and it sort of demonstrates some of the things that I'm talking about. The thing with conifers is you don't get so many sprouts coming up like this, but what happens is the growth goes to the next lowest limbs, and they slowly turn up. They'll actually turn into something that looks like a flame, and make new leaders. I can read trees by seeing how they grew, whether or not something was done to them, and I can count backwards and tell you how long ago it was. So this is a sort of pruning that is what we call real tree pruning or selective pruning. There's actually a booklet put out by the American National Standards Institute. They make standards for all the different professions, like carpentry or electricians or whatever they have standards for. It's called the ANSI 300s, ANSI 300, pruning standards. And if you're having a tree service come to bid on your trees, you want them to prune to the ANSI 300s. And that way you know what you're getting. And there's a nice description about what that means and what that looks like and what they should be doing in each of the various categories. Tree planting. Everybody thinks they know how to plant a tree. Why, you just dig a hole, you put the tree in, put the dirt back, and you got a tree, right? I can already see that this person does not know how to plant a tree. She's dressed incorrectly.
She's holding the shovel incorrectly.
Not a professional, I can guarantee you. She seems to be having a good time though. Or maybe the people around her are. So this is how I learned to plant trees. When I started out, it was you dig a big hole twice as big as your tree, and you put in a bunch of amendments and stir them all up. You put the tree in, and put some more dirt in, and tamp it with the back of your shovel, and then you put on some stakes and you very firmly set it up so that it doesn't fall over and it can withstand the winds and will grow with a strong trunk. And then you give it a little bit of fertilizer to get it off to a good start. And if you're transplanting, the old idea was that you would cut back the top to compensate for the roots that were cut off. And it turns out that pretty much none of these things are correct, which is kind of hard to believe. I know I was surprised, but a couple of very famous scientists got into testing stuff. And the first one was the tree planting pit or hole. And they found out that people would put the tree in, and then it would sink. And soil would collect in there, and the tree would be too deep. And what happens when your tree is too deep is it collects water in there, which rots the trunk out. And also dirt up against the trunk where it collects sort of, what do you call it, sort of smothers it. It makes the bark get mushy, and that's not good. So now we dig a hole that's exactly the depth of the root ball, but we make it really wide, because tree roots don't really go down so much as they go out, which is another sort of misperception about how trees grow. And another guy went to test to see which amendment worked better. Pardon me, I have a hot flash. So, God's great gift to women. His other great gift to us. And he found out that he had a control group of trees that didn't have amendments, like peat moss in the soil. And he found out that the ones that in 3 years, the ones that were amended versus the ones that weren't, were all the same size. And in fact, some people feel that adding amendments can hold your tree back because the roots stay in this nice fluffy soil and don't get out into the, what we in the business call crap soil, you know, where they're supposed to live the rest of their lives. So the recommendation now is to refill with the soil that came out of the hole. And that's pretty hard on us gardeners because, you know, we deal with, you know, glacial till and clay and stuff. What they did find out was that just breaking up the soil helps a lot because tree roots can grow like 5 feet in a year. And so if you can break out that soil, they can put their roots through that clay soil before it all settles back down and turns into crap. So if you want to till your soil near where you're planting your tree, every foot that you add helps it. Let's see, staking the tree firmly. They also found out that trees that are staked, you know, like in 3 places up and down the tree, don't wave in the wind, you know, because they're so firmly staked with that stake right next to it. And a tree's waving in the wind is what tells it to get fat and sturdy and put on weight at the base. So if you've ever gotten a tree from a nursery and you unstake it and it flops over, that's because it was staked really tightly. It didn't wave in the wind, and they also stripped up all the lower limbs before it should be done. Huh. Who knew? So the idea is you don't want your tree to blow over either. So if it's a little guy and you don't think he's going to make it through the winter, sure, you give him a couple of stakes and you stake him up high, and then after a year you unleash him and, you know, let him go. You let it, and if it's going to hold up itself, you can just tell you don't stake it at all. Sometimes I put in a stake in case it's near like a parking lot because we want the bumper to hit the stake before it hits the tree. Rebar is good for that because, you know, you can hear it. Fertilizer, turns out you don't want to give fertilizer the first couple of years. It won't hurt particularly. But what fertilizer does is it sort of, it causes them to put on a lot more foliage, and we want them to put on roots. So we let them get established before we start fertilizing them, and actually, those of us in the business don't fertilize much at all. Mm-hmm. We just, you know, it's, the only thing a tree probably needs is a little nitrogen from time to time. And also the cutting back of the top to compensate for root loss, same guy, Carl Whitcomb, did a control, you know, headed back these trees, just cutting off the tips after he dug them. And it turns out that the tips exude a chemical which tells the roots to grow. So he cut those off, and the roots didn't get established as well. So there are a lot of things that make sense to the logical mind, and then that science gets involved. And, you know, it turns out that maybe what you thought was true isn't. Which is, and you know how you collect evidence for your point of view. But it did save a lot of time. You know, we don't have to dig that deep hole, and you don't have to buy all those amendments, and you don't have to do all that staking. Although people want to help their trees, you know, they're good hearted. So this is how we do help our trees. The thing that did make a big difference is mulch. And that's any organic material that you put on top of the soil like a blanket. And it helps keep the moisture in, keeps the weeds down, and moderates the temperature, things don't freeze as much. Another guy did 2 rows of trees along this hillside row, and he put in various composts on one side into the planting hole. And on the other side, he didn't do any, he planted them and just put on mulch. And the ones with mulch outgrew the ones with whatever was in the compost, whatever was in the planting hole, whatever he amended it with. So the very nicest thing you can do is mulch. But of course you can't mulch too high or too low or with the wrong kind. So how high do you go? Do you want to slide on that? 2 to 4 inches is about right of mulch. The bigger the mulch is, the more chunky it is, the more it holds down the weeds. What a tree would actually like is the wood chips that come from a tree service. They don't particularly like beauty bark because it holds onto water and it doesn't get down. And besides, it gives slivers to people who are weeding. I know. But you don't want to stack it up against the trunk because then you get into the same thing as when you planted it too deep. It rots off the crown. So I actually just use my gloved hand and just brush it away from the trunk. Let's see what else is in there. Oh yeah. You think you're planting your tree right because you're a master gardener. You've been doing it for a long time. I guarantee you, you have planted a lot of things too deep because it's just automatic. You dig that big hole, you put the plant in, and then you put the soil back in. They went to a site where the professionals had planted a bunch of trees, and they excavated them and found 80% were planted 2 to 4 inches too deep. I've done it myself. So when you're planting your tree and you have it in the hole, you put a bar across, like a shovel handle, and then see if the level of the top of the pot, the dirt in the pot, is the same as the surrounding land. You'll find that it's frequently 2 to 4 inches too deep, and then you rock your tree and shove some dirt under it, rock the other way, put some dirt under it. And take the time to figure it out and get it right. And also, something that I'm sure some of you know is you have to ruffle the roots or take off whatever's around it. If it's burlap or the circling, girdling roots are evident, you just take your hand pruner and cut them all up because those roots need to go straight out into the soil. They don't want to, you shouldn't have them continuing to go in circles. Those of us who dig up dead trees see a lot of them that are still in their pots. They have a root system exactly the size of the pot that was installed. Because once those roots start circling, because they ran into the pot, they don't straighten out. So we're actually pretty rough with our roots. I mean, we get our hand pruners out, or sometimes a bread knife, and just slice and ruffles. Get those going out.
And the burlap and cords and everything that they tie on there.
Yeah. Remove as much as you can. The only time you get into trouble is if it's like a vine maple that was dug in the woods and you take out the burlap, all the dirt falls off, that could kill it. But if it's going to stay, in its form, and they usually grow things in heavy clay, you want to get off cages, you want to get off burlap, you want to get off twine. I don't care what they tell you. It's really not going to rot in many instances. But what you can do when you plant your tree,
I pulled them out years later when I moved into a house.
Yeah. And you can, it can take 30 years for a circling, girdling root to kill a tree. I've been on properties where every tree was about, 20 years old and they were all starting to go down, and we excavated and it was girdling roots. That's when one lashes itself around the trunk. It's a sad world if you meet. Everywhere you go, you see death and destruction. Poor landscape practices. Instead of heading back your tree to compensate for root loss, you can do some helpful pruning. And that is, if it turns out that you have what's called a double leader on a tree that's supposed to have a single leader, one main trunk, a tree's supposed to go up like this and then crown out. If you have 2 trunks that are close together and the bark is squeezed between them, you have a thing called included bark. and that will be a weak point for your tree. What happens is as the two trunks enlarge, they run into each other, and they create a seam of bark instead of connective tissue between the two trunks. And then when they get big and heavy, they can split out in a storm. And I have seen deodar cedar that had two trunks, each one this big, that had lived for all those years. It was an enormous tree, but it had included bark, and it hadn't failed in all those years, but I took a look at it and said, oh, that's pretty bad. Should I tell my customer, or am I panicking her? And so I took a look and I thought, well, if they fall apart, and this one goes, it'll crush your house. But if this one goes, it'll land harmlessly into the lawn. And I think this one is going to go, if that was to happen. And sure enough, big storm, that's what happened. Cost her, thousands of dollars to get what was still up there off. If you catch this when the tree is young and your cuts are no bigger than this, you can stop a tree from falling apart 20 years later. Nobody will ever know, but you'll have a good feeling inside.
So if it's 4-inch or less?
Yeah, it's, you want to do this with young trees that, I think a trunk that is this big might be the maximum, with the 2 leaders being that big. When you get beyond that, you have to do other things. And I'm sure they are in this book.
At my neighbor's house.
Yes, written by yours truly. But that's something you can do to help out. This is what happens if you don't. And then people think that they see a sick tree or a dead tree. And I don't know if they ever wonder, but they might presume that it was just died because it was old, or maybe some bugs got to it. Or, if it fell over, it was because of high winds. And of course, tree haters are responsible for a lot of tree deaths. And also, if you have a sick tree, people are wondering if there's something that they can do to fix it. Maybe the magic elixir, I call it. Whether it's vitamin B12 or mycorrhizae or all these. There's always something new coming along that's going to save your tree and make things grow better. And some of them may work, but by and large, once you notice your tree is sick, it's too late. Because once more than a third of it is involved, you got a third of the crown dying back, your tree is maybe too far gone. Those are the things that kill, I'll get that later, that we think kill trees, but really it's a combination of stresses. Well, some trees are long-lived and strong, and some just naturally aren't, but by their species. But when I see trees, I think it's probably because, it was topped many times, somebody hit it with a truck, then it was somebody left something girdled on it, and then somebody didn't water it, and so it just kind of dragged, And then the last thing that hits it, that causes it to go over, that gets the blame. And it's usually an insect, because healthy trees repel insects. The old saying is, good health defies disease. And it's true. It's sort of like modern medicine was, maybe in the 1700s. The main thing was to stay healthy, because we don't have penicillin for trees yet. So these are the things that get trees. Lawnmower damage, weed eater damage at the base. The crown's a very sensitive area. People bash into that, break the bark, and that's not good. Tree topping, of course, and any kind of damage to the branches or the trunk. When you back your truck into it, or the delivery guy tears off a side branch. They're nice people. They just made a mistake. They just weren't thinking. And this picture has killed a lot of trees. You see this picture everywhere. This is on all your labels. This is what the picture everybody has very deeply and subconsciously in their minds. There's the one that my niece drew. There it is. And you see the crown is sort of mirrored by the roots. They're sort of the equal size, and they look pretty much the same. Well, Well, that's not how trees' roots generally look. They look more like, say, a goblet on a plate. They're way wider than the crown, they're way shallower, and most of the feeding roots are in the top few inches. And there isn't that giant taproot. There is a taproot, but there's sinker roots periodically. It's because all those little roots hold on to all that soil that stabilizes it. And why do we care? Oh, here's some pictures of it. When they excavated roots, we also think roots go out sort of like the spokes of a wheel, that they're kind of even and mirror the crown. And actually, a main root will go way off here, and there won't be much over here. And they cross back and forth and go all kinds of weird ways. They don't look like the top. And they get small very quickly. A major root is really like a 3-inch root. When people ask me, how big of a root can I cut? Or how big is a big root? And I say about 3 inches, but then you can probably disturb or cut up to 1/3 of your roots off and still be okay. But when you get beyond that, you're in trouble. And certainly every foot closer you get to the trunk makes your tree in deeper trouble. And it could look perfectly healthy when you're over, but it isn't attached to anything, and it can fall over in a wind. Works like a hinge. So this thing that you see sometimes on the side of the road, where the roots are relatively shallow and spread out, that's more how tree roots grow. A lot of it has to do with the soil profile, but there you go. And, if the trees are deep, you don't have to worry about putting in a new electric or sewer system, because you're not cutting off any roots. But if you're going to tunnel right next to a tree, and those roots are on the surface, you can inadvertently cut off 1/3 of your tree's roots. So the good guys tunnel under them when they start running into them. And it also matters when you cut and fill, if you add like a foot or two of soil all over your tree's roots. They don't like that. Trees don't need so much water coming down to them as they need air. There are air pockets in all the soil profile, and that's what fills up with the water, and then it drains out. So if you get rid of those air pockets by putting dirt on the top and sinking them, your tree will not like that. I managed to grow one of my trees that way. And compaction. Who here knows about compaction? If I had another life to lead, it would be to stop construction damage to trees, because they'll live for 7 years afterwards before they even show any damage. And so nobody connects the two, because they're living off their reserves. They store energy. So compaction happens when you, well, this is what it looks like. If your tree is dying from the tip back, that's usually, not always, but usually means something going on with the roots. Something bad, a root rot or compaction. Compaction is when you drive or even walk all over your tree's roots and squeeze out all those air pockets. So a kid's play area, pastures always have a dead tree in the middle of them, because all the horses go right under the tree because it's shady, and all those hooves, how many pounds per square inch is that, compacts that soil. Construction sites, they drive back and forth through the root zone to get to what they're doing. And what else? Driving, people who park on their roots. When you see roots on the top like that, it's not a good sign. There are some, if you're going to do construction around your tree, a good thing to do is to put 1 to 2 feet of wood chips and drive over that. And it's worse if you drive over it in wet soil. It really squeezes out the air pockets. Questions? Oh, good, we don't know. Oh, yeah.
How did that happen? Why, you said that's not good, but how did it happen? I mean,
This?
Yeah.
Same way that it happens with your lawn. It's just foot traffic and time. The soil in nature is constantly rebuilding itself with fluffy leaves and things that are decomposing on it. We rake all those leaves off, we walk all over stuff, and it just kind of chunks down.
So, would you put mulch on top of it? Is that?
Yeah, that's what I do. I actually very carefully chisel out the lawn with a little, what I call the baby mattock, chisel that out, or if you're not organic, you can use Roundup, kill the grass, and then put mulch on top of it, yeah.
Okay, I planted bare root birch about 6 years ago.
Oh, yeah, they're famous for being on the surface.
Okay, just this year I started noticing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not a high traffic area.
No,
And it's
no.
should I cover it is the question.
Surrender now, Dorothy.
Surrender now, Dorothy.
They're very surface, on the surface, very
They
bad.
don't bother me, is it?
Oh, no, that's fine, I just put mulch on them and yeah, put some bulbs through. And the drought, you know, trees are still dying from the drought last year. We're all on vacation, we thought it rains here all the time. Well, you know, adult trees don't need water. They have those roots that go way down deep into wherever they find the water, and they don't, they're in the lawn. And we try to be good people, so we turn the water off to the lawn, let it go brown, and of course all the tree roots are going, but wait, I'm here too. So you don't have to water your tree all the time, but on those heavy drought years, I would suggest you take out a hose, and when nobody's looking in the middle of the night, when the water police aren't out, you put it on a slow drip and just flood the zone and let it sink down. Because drought, and especially one drought after another, very bad for trees. Sometimes the drought will set them up for root rot, believe it or not, which happens when things are wet. And we do get a lot of rots. People think it's bugs that gets trees, but we, in the Pacific Northwest, we specialize in rots. Because, you know, it is wet here all the time. And we have all different kinds of rots. And you can see them some of the time by the mushrooms or the conchs that show up on trees. They each have their own very distinctive mushroom, and which is a good reason to have your arborist out in the fall so they can see what's growing, what's on the outside. Just because you have something growing on your tree does not mean it's hazardous or gonna die. You need somebody out there who knows what they are and can tell you how much rot has entered your tree. Armillaria, Phytophthora, things like that, wonderful diseases like that. Verticillium, I guess, is a wilt, not a rot. Butt rots, yeah. So the base of a tree is called the butt of a tree. I just thought it was funny. You got your top rods, you do. Top rods. There's a cubical butt rod. There's a lot of these. Slime flux is another thing trees get. They've got all kinds of, there's a whole pathology to trees. Homozoonosis. You get extra points if you can say Phytophthora and spell it as well on the horticultural spelling bee. Yeah.
Excuse me, if you see mushrooms or whatever around the yard where the tree roots are, is that good or bad?
There's lots of mushrooms for lots of reasons. I don't worry about it when I see it out in the yard. At the base of the tree, if it looks like that one, sort of, I would have an arborist out. It's called the honey mushroom. But especially if you have like a decomposing old building under or an old tree that got buried by your, when they built the new house, or mulch often gets a sheet of white mycelium under it. And no, I think mushrooms is a good thing. It's just decomposing stuff, especially if you use organic materials. It's a great mushroom here last year. I'm very lucky to be a gardener because I get to see such fabulous things in the garden, you know, when everybody else has given up and gone inside. So no, it needs to be on the tree or at the base of the tree, I'd say. Well, I'm not a pathologist. Most people subconsciously think of their trees as an ornamentation, something pretty to look at, but that's about it. The reason we have them is because they're pretty. And that also does a lot of damage to trees because people don't understand how useful they are and how much we need them, especially in urban areas, because of the good things that they do. The top three are stormwater, the heat island, and air pollution. Stormwater, are you guys in stormwater trouble yet?
Yes.
Yeah, when the water hits the pavement, it runs into the sewers, and that goes right out to the bodies of water, rivers, and then out to the Puget Sound. And they carry all kinds of crud with them. They carry all the grease and the oil and the road dust. And the main polluter now of Puget Sound, which is one of the 5 most polluted bodies of water in the nation, is non-point, which means it doesn't come from industry. It comes from people's roofs, the yards, the roads, especially impermeable surfaces. And we would rather it sunk into the soil and slowly dripped off the trees, and they release it into this nice fluffy dirt that's underneath, as opposed to running off your roof, onto your driveway, into the gutter, and straight down into the streams. The other one is the heat island effect. I think I have a picture of that. So what happens, it's not global climate change so much as it is the heat island effect. The surfaces, the concrete surfaces in the city absorb the heat, and it reflects back and forth, and it gets very hot. And then at night, it releases that heat. So your friends in the country are having a nice cool evening, while those of us in the city are still baking and can't get to sleep. And so trees, one, shade the houses so they don't get so hot to begin with. And they don't release that heat in the evening. And what else? So it actually changes the weather. The weather is different around urban places. That if your house is shaded by a tree, you don't have to pay as much for energy. If we aren't using as much energy, we're probably not buying energy from other places that is bad for the global warming. What else? Oh, and people get sick. Every degree more heat you have more incidence of a host of diseases and health issues that are related to stress and heat. So it's also a public health issue. And you get smog, urban flooding, slides, a lot more slides. So they're actually working on dollar values for trees. The city picks up, which is to say the taxpayer picks up the bill when too many people cut down trees. And the problem is how each individual tree doesn't make that big of a difference, but you add them all up and they make a huge difference. So you can't argue against any one tree coming down. We love our forests, but it's just this one tree that's in the way. It's got to go. That's how environmental problems are created.
Could you repeat that?
What did I say? And I'll repeat it.
that whole spiel.
That whole spiel?
It's a very important point.
Okay.
I
Well,
would like you to go
we
over.
love trees as a group, but we cut them down one at a time. And they aren't lost as a group. They're lost one at a time because what this tree is doing environmentally and all these other for public health, it's not that big a deal. But when you add them all up, that is a big deal. And that's how you go downhill. It's sort of the global warming argument. My car that I drive around, the emissions it's getting isn't that much compared to all the emissions that are out there, but it's the collection of all of them that's doing the damage. So almost all environmental issues are based on that problem, which is this one thing can't make that much difference. And then we just, then it's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So it takes a certain kind of community thinking to put up with, raking the leaves and all those other nasty things that trees do, and create too much shade and all that kind of stuff, worry that it's going to fall on my house. Because you are providing a public good when you keep your tree. Question?
What size of a tree is this? I'm sure it has to be, if I planted this year and it's 5 foot tall, it probably doesn't do all
Oh,
that.
no, It has to definitely do with the stage. And you can actually get a dollar figure for your tree from a website that has a calculator. And what would that be? I think it's iStreet. That's the letter I-street. And it will tell you what some of the ecosystem services are. they keep discovering and quantifying more. But you could say I have a trunk that's 2 feet diameter, it's deciduous, and it'll calculate generally how much it's worth in those services. Oh, but there's way more. I just like trees, and I've always liked trees. So every time they find out there's something good about trees, I think now they'll really start to respect trees, and we'll have more trees would be great. But science keeps turning up new stuff about trees. Some of it's pretty unbelievable until you read the research. One is that there's actually less crime. Yeah, cool. Having a cookie? Oh, okay. That's allowed. Am I talking too long? I can see that.
No.
Yes?
That's the National Tree Benefit Calculator.
The National Tree Benefit Calculator.
Just type it in and you'll get it.
Boom.
You can find out.
Yeah, I was disappointed at how small the values were. I think they're going to go up because they keep adding stuff to them. They did a study of the projects in Chicago, these horrible low-income projects where they crammed anybody in these giant buildings, and they looked exactly the same, except one side faced green stuff, trees and grass and things, and the other side faced more buildings, more concrete jungle. And they interviewed all the people, and they did some real good, thorough interviewing about various aspects of their lives. And they found out that there was definitely less stress, less illness. The kids paid attention more in school. And then another guy came by and said, this can't be true. You can't figure all that stuff out with just a questionnaire. So he looked up the police reports and the hospital admissions and found out that there was less property crime and less violent crime on the side that had the green than the side that didn't. And that was pretty astounding. And then they did something about premature births and mortality. I thought, a tree doesn't keep you alive, for crying out loud. But in parts of the country, not Dutch elm disease, but the emerald ash borer is taking out blocks and blocks of trees all at once. And so you can look up the records for that community before and after, when those trees were there and then when they weren't. And they found significant differences in a lot of health issues, premature births, early mortality. You're already sick, but if you're living in a hot house and can't go out walking because there's no trees there, that's enough to make a difference in how long you live. So just so you know, there's a whole bunch more of that stuff. It fills books now. And there's a few other myths and rumors I thought I would throw in that I can't really go into, but one is that our city lots are too small for big trees. And in many ways, big trees take up less room. How do you figure, Cass? Because a little tree spreads out down below, which is right in the way of, you walking down your path and running your lawnmower and the kids playing. Whereas a big tree you can limb up, clear up above your roof, and you can have that area for what, trucks don't hit your limbs and this, that, and the other thing. So people are always putting in 5 quote-unquote small trees and running into trouble later. Just remember, a small tree doesn't mean it doesn't grow. Saying small tree is sort of like saying a small whale. It's still a big thing.
Yeah.
It's bigger than you think it's going to be. Oh, and we don't use printing paint anymore. Dr. Shigo got to that one. He drilled and ripped and made all these damages to trees, and then he put on all these different printing paints and wound seals. And then he let them live for a few more years, and then he sliced them this way. Not this way, but this way. And opened up the trunks like this to follow where the rot went. And it turned out that none of them worked. And when he said that, he got into big trouble with some companies that manufactured it. What trees do when you wound them, when you hit them with a truck or cut off a limb, is they change internally with a chemical and create a barrier that keeps the rot from going in and down and around. It's called walling off. It's walling off or compartmentalizing the injury. And then the tree tries to outgrow it. So you may have pockets or more likely columns of rot inside your tree from old injuries that don't spread to the rest of the tree because of compartmentalization in trees. It's their survival mechanism. Our survival mechanism when we're getting wounded is to run. But trees can't do that. The old saying is, trees will stand for anything because they can't walk away. So when you see a hole in your tree, a cavity, it may have already made that wall. You do not want to drill a hole to drain it because that will open up the rest of the trunk to rot. It'll be a new injury. And you don't want to drill, into fresh wood because you've just destroyed that barrier. Isn't it amazing how much we thought was true and what makes sense? Oh, this is a little plug for Plant Amnesty. We have a lot of information. We have YouTube, mainly on pruning, but we have other information. You can call people. They're actually instructed to answer the phone. Isn't that refreshing? If the phone rings, pick it up. We have a referral service of arborists and gardeners who we know how to prune, don't just think they do. They can do risk assessments, things like that. But I just wanted to mention that I really do know that trees are an amenity. And they're a very personal amenity for a lot of people. Kids and old people really like trees. In the middle part of your life, you're just too busy, getting on with stuff. But when you're a kid, trees are one of the places where it's at. And, dogs like trees too. And I identify with this. And they're the backdrop of our lives. If we just lived in cities without trees, how would we know that the seasons were changing? How would we hear a bird? And they continue to be sort of the scenery of our lives, right to the end. A lot of mothers don't like this one. So I hope we'll keep the trees in, and I'm just going to finish up with some pretty slides of some trees I brought, so you can remember. Cherry trees, beautiful trees. Fall, how do we know fall? It's dreary enough. If we didn't have those trees turning color. So be sure to take good care of your trees. That's it. So if anybody has some questions, I think we have 9 minutes left. That was it. You wanted more? Yeah?
Well, I don't really know what kind of tree I have, so this may be difficult, but it's very willowy looking.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't done anything to it, but it has grown. It has grown out. I have like 3 different rain gardens, big, up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in my second limb, or whatever you want to call it, second.
Tier.
Anyway, tier. It has shoot out the root and has started another tree.
Oh, nice.
So what do I do? How do I get rid of it? Because the tree's like my size now. So what do I do?
Is your size the tree or the little tree?
The little tree.
The
So
little tree is your size?
Well, I'm 5'10", yeah. So I keep trimming it back.
Yeah,
and it
keep
keeps
shooting
getting
back up.
bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons people don't plant willows or poplars or cottonwoods. They have the largest living organism above ground on the planet is an aspen grove, because it sends out roots and those send out shoots like that. And so you have a problem. You're correct on that. I guess I would dig down and cut the root and hope that it didn't send up a new shoot.
Well, but it's coming out through. I have a rock garden. It's coming out from the rock garden. So would you try to dig it where the tree is, or would you try to dig it where the little tree is?
It's hard for me to tell because I can't see it.
Okay.
I can't see how far it is. You've got what they call tree trouble. Yeah.
Okay.
I have known arborists, and I can't see it, but when somebody was going to build close to a tree or wanted to, they would do a root excavation and just, you know, dig out around the roots to see where they go. And if there's no, you know, maybe you can follow it out as far as you can and cut it off there. But you can't,
Trimming it every year doesn't work.
huh?
Trimming it every year doesn't
No,
work.
it's the same thing as with the water sprouts. It just comes back and comes back.
Okay, I'll call an arborist.
Yeah, you'll call an arborist. I think you might want to try a baggie. And shade it out. Cut it and put something dark over it. And it'll come out the side and go up. I really want to live. A rug might be nice because it will let the water through.
I might try that. Okay, thank you.
Good question. Yeah.
Got a question. Those maples, we have those maples. Small maples, colorful trees. Do they develop fungi and moss on them in the wintertime?
Well, they are. Oh, they do.
They
yeah.
do. And then they basically kill the branch or the, well, they choke it. Whatever. If you don't get it off, it basically just kills that part of the.
How thick is it? So what you have is lichen and moss, with like gray puffballs and the scales and
And then
stuff
turns
like
into
that.
moss, and then the small twigs that comes off of that area.
Well, you can some people consider that an ornamental feature. It's really more a sign of aging. I think of it as the gray hair of the plant world. It doesn't make you old, but it indicates you're old and tired. That's probably not doing a lot of good. It's only when it's completely encasing the bark that I bother to kind of rub it off. But if it's just some of it, I actually makes it more, some people find it more interesting. And I think what you have is a vine maple. And the old ones, they splay apart, which you can expect after a certain age, as the trunks just, which is why it's called a vine maple, is when the pioneers got here, there were so many on the ground that were kind of twisting along the ground that they thought of it as a vine. It was really just an old vine maple that had fallen over. I know mine are starting to go. I think I'm gonna give it a crutch, yeah?
In a church parking lot, there are evergreens, and you can see the roots, you know, and that's brought this right. I mean, you can see the dying stuff at the top. Is there any hope for those kind of trees, or what do you do? Wait for them to die or something?
Well, if you have, is it compaction then?
Yeah, that's a compaction.
And is the compaction under concrete, or is it coming through concrete, or is there dirt?
It's between, you know, the cement that holds like a place where they put the trees in, and there's asphalt.
How willing is the parish to deal with that?
I don't know why I would ask.
Well, if it was my tree and I wanted to save it, I'd jackhammer out the concrete, and I would do something called air spading, which is where they blast the soil away with a jet of water, like a pressure washer, and then replace that with fluffy soil. And that could, depending on how far gone it is, it would probably really appreciate that. It might come back, depending on how far gone it is.
Yeah, that would be probably a hard sell.
Yeah. Another thing you can do is, well, just mulching the bare ground parts would be nice.
I thought about that when I saw that.
And sometimes it's so compacted that it doesn't do any good. So, you know, you could like drill holes and mulch it. But that's a lot harder. That's one of the reasons why compaction is such a big deal. It's until they developed the air spade, there was nothing you could do really. So, you know, make it comfortable, take out the dead wood, make sure it gets water in the summer. Anything else? Yeah?
It wasn't a question, but I just thought people who are interested in trees might like to know. There's one study that I didn't see mentioned there, but it showed that people in hospital rooms that could see a tree got well faster.
And they use less painkillers.
Yes, that part I hadn't read, but I called our hospital, and because I thought that the proposed changes would be taking out some of the trees on the campus, and they said absolutely not. They knew about that study and they weren't moving the trees. So we can all get well.
Well, you know, and just the fact that, you know, an office with a view is so much more prized than one without. You know, it's something that we know sort of instinctually, but science is now actually quantifying it. And when you can quantify it, you can put a dollar value to it. And if you can put a dollar value to it, then people take a little more effort to work them into their lives, retain them. And governments are more likely to spend some money to do what it takes to include trees and green things. I actually like the green, just all the green things except maybe weeds. Even those do some good. So, if there's no more questions, I would really like if people would eat these cookies. Because if not, I'll be forced to take them home to my husband if they make them that far. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was great. Thank you very much, Cass. I appreciate you being here, and appreciate you all taking some time out of your Cinco de Mayo to join us. And hopefully there's still some tacos left for me. Let's give her another round of applause.
You might want to indicate where they can buy these books, things of that nature.
Oh, you can buy this book here for $24. Cash or check to Cass Turnbull. And you're free to take any of these things that you see up here. It's all planamnesty.org. You can order stuff from them, you can call them, you can email them. And YouTube has the video. You tap in YouTube, then you tap in Plant Amnesty, and you get the channel, and you're overwhelmed with, how the internet is. With all these pictures, you hit the word playlists, and that will give you the selections you can choose from.
Great.
Oh.
What's your favorite tree?
Oh, I have so many favorite trees. God, that's a really hard question. I need somebody to ask it. I could give you a list of my favorite trees. They're about Japanese, any kind of Japanese maple. I really like the deodars and the atlases. I have a fondness for our native dogwood, which is going downhill, and the native dryder.
Why is it going downhill?
Anthracnose, very bad disease, gets them pretty bad. Big trees. If you're an arborophile, you go for big. You start out liking the little pink flowers, and I still do. And then you start going for like nice fall color and interesting bark, and then you look for buds and dingle dangles and stuff, but you wind up with big trees. And I guess the king of the big tree is the oak, a lot of some of the oaks. And
Can we grow?
oh yeah, the Oregon oak, what's it called? Oh, any of the oaks, deciduous oaks, bur oak, I remember thinking very highly of when I found it. And we look at them in the winter. We don't look at them for leaves. We look at them for branch structure. So we're driving around the winter judging, that one's good, that one's good. And I gotta say, the weeping willow, which I was too good for a while, it's still, with that moss and those little ferns on it and the canopy. I mean, it just looks like an armchair that you can climb up in and settle down in and, like that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.